Hey, y'all, and welcome back. So, hopefully, you had a chance to watch the first one in this series called Today Do We Do Math? So, today we're going to be continuing and we're going to be answering the question Today, did we write something? All right. So, I'm doing this new series where at the end of each day, um, you can ask yourself these 9 different questions. And if you can answer yes to all of them, or at least to most of them, you can rest assured it was a really good day. Okay. And you don't even have to wait to the end of the day. So if you're a planner like me and you're planning out your week, ask yourself these 9 questions as you're planning. And if you notice in your planning, you have answered yes to all of these questions, you know it's going to be a really good day. Okay. Or a really good week. So, first of all, today, did we write? That's what we're going to be talking about in this second part of our series. So, first of all, let's talk about those writing standards. All right. Now, I mentioned this in my other one about math. Today, did we do math? I talk about this all the time in my podcast. Those standards. All right. So, um, let me just say it one more time. Standards, including writing standards, whether they're state standards or your school district standards, or you're with a charter school and it's your charter school standards, whatever, they're all very arbitrary. Okay. They are created by mass producing multi-million dollar publishers who are just trying to get their curriculum out there, right? They're created by bureaucrats, government bureaucrats in the education department. They are created by so-called experts in the field. Um, they really aren't being created by people who have child development in mind and the child's best interest in mind. Okay. The reason teachers have standards, writing standards and math standards and history standards, is it's a way to help the school system corral 20 to 30 students, all in the same age, all in the same grade, and figure out a way to teach them certain things and to assess them all the same way. Okay. So, using standards in a classroom setting, it can be very helpful for a teacher who has all of these kids that they have to teach and assess, right? You don't really need standards because that's what they were created for. You don't need that in a homeschool environment. All right. So you don't really need them. All right. But let's talk about the writing standards. So let's say you want to maybe use them as your guidepost or your guideline because you're thinking maybe your kid will go back into the school system one day, or you just don't want them to get behind or whatever. Okay. We have different reasons why we feel like we need to follow the standards. The writing standards, much like the math standards, not only are they arbitrary, but they're very repetitive. Okay. So, what I mean by that is your kid's going to learn the 8 parts of speech. Okay. And they're going to learn them out of nauseum from grade 1 all the way until grade 8. Okay. So, what the writing standards do, the scope and sequence, the table of contents of each textbook, is in first grade, they're going to learn what a noun is, right? Person, place, or thing. In second grade, they're going to learn what a noun is again, except now they're going to learn maybe that there's common nouns and then there's proper nouns. Okay. In third grade, they're going to learn about nouns again, except now they're going to add there's abstract nouns and there's concrete nouns. All right. So you get the gist. So every year, they're going to learn the 8 different parts of speech, except each year they just add on one more little detail about that particular parts of speech. Same thing with editing and punctuation and grammar. They're going to learn from the beginning in first grade that you have to capitalize every sentence. All right. And then the next year in second grade, they're going to learn that rule again. And then they're going to learn about other words that need to be capitalized. All right. So you can do it step by step, grade by grade, like this when it's not meaningful to the kids. Or you could teach them those grammar and punctuation and spelling rules as they come up in their writing when they need it. All right. So, my thought is I always encourage moms, instead of using the state standards as your guidepost, because they may not fit with your home environment, your home learning environment, or what your kid needs or where your kid is at, is you come up with the standards for language arts. Okay. So think about, why is it important that your kids learn language arts? All right. Now, it's called language arts for a reason because language is an art. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in language arts, not just writing and handwriting. You've got your reading, you've got your reading comprehension, you've got your spelling, you've got your vocabulary, you've got your grammar part of it, you've got your speaking part of it. I feel like I'm missing one more, but there's a whole bunch all wrapped up in the actual writing, and then the composition where you're coming up with putting your words into writing. Okay, all of that is language arts. And so, why is it important to you that your child masters the art of language? All right. The answer to that question then becomes your standards, your reason for your child mastering language arts, your goal at the end that when they graduate, they become adults, that they have these skills in language. Okay. So, why is it important to you? So, for us, the main reason was we wanted our kids to be able to hear the gospel, understand the gospel, and relay the gospel in such a way that other people can know Jesus Christ. All right. We wanted them to be able to read the Bible and understand the Bible, apply the Bible, and share the Bible. We wanted them to be able to communicate with other people in writing, in words, right? We wanted them to be able to communicate with others in a functional way. So when they're at a job or when they're applying for a job, right? We wanted them to be able to run a business or their household, and writing and communication, that's a huge part of it, right? Okay. So these were all of the reasons why we wanted our kids to master the art of language. And so those reasons, those goals became our standards. All right. So if those were our standards, that we wanted them to be able to communicate in such a way with other people in writing, in words, then it didn't really matter what grade they learned their parts of speech. It didn't really matter at what age they learned all the capitalization rules. What mattered was that they learned those rules and that they applied them, right? So it didn't matter that they became master spellers by fifth grade. What did matter is by the time they graduated, they could spell in such a way that it didn't hinder them or their communication with other people. Okay. So when you look at it that way, it doesn't really matter when they learn these skills or when they master these skills. We just want to make sure they master them, right? So let's just say they go off to college or they're applying for a job. Their future boss and their college admissions counselor isn't going to ask them what age did they learn to read. What they want to know is that they can read, and they can read well enough to learn from it, right? And to comprehend and to do the job or to do the class. All right. So it doesn't matter when, it's that they actually master these skills. Okay. So let's talk about those skills real quick. So think about, now, I know we talked about today, did we write, right? This is the main topic of this uh, video. Okay. We will get into reading in another one. All right. But let's look at language arts as a whole, first of all. Okay. So, first of all, the stages of it is first when you've got babies and toddlers. The first thing they do in the language arts is they're understanding language, whatever language that is that you're speaking, and then they learn to speak it. Okay. So that's actually the natural progression, to understand something and then to be able to speak it. Okay. Then the next stage is actually the writing. Now, we're not talking about, taking our thoughts and putting them on paper, but the actual writing and scribbles, right? So at first, kids are not going to be writing incomplete sentences. They're not going to be writing letters, but they do start to scribble and make notations in writing. Okay. So that's the second stage. Then you've got the next stage of language art, which is they start to comprehend things that are read to them. And then eventually they learn to read on their own. And there's a range there. It could go from 4 to 14. Okay. So we're not going to talk about what age it is to that kids are supposed to be reading. We'll talk about that in another one. Okay. So then you've got the comprehending of things that are read to you, and then they start to read on their own. Then the next stage of language arts is starting that writing process where they're able to organize their thoughts in their head in such a way that they can either say it out loud or they can write it down, right? So then that's what we're going to be talking about today. And then you've got the next stage is usually older, junior high and high school, where they're honing those speaking skills, their presentation skills, and then they know it so well, whatever the subject is, that they're able to teach it to someone else. Okay. And then grammar and punctuation, and then spelling. Usually spelling is last. All right. So keep that in mind. If your student is a really good reader, they're a pretty good writer, they know all their like rules of grammar and punctuation, but their spelling is awful, just know that that's really one of the last skills that comes along. Okay. So once they start to speak and present and organize their thoughts, then you've got the grammar, the punctuation, and then the spelling. Okay. So what are, when you look at those writing standards, right? And if you really read them, they just repeat themselves over and over and over. Okay. And if you look at a table of contents or the scope and sequence of a traditional textbook, it's the same stuff over and over and over. It's just that they give them different topics to write about, and the assignments become longer. Okay. So let's just boil it down to when your kids are at certain ages or grade levels, what do you need to be focusing on, whether you use a curriculum or not? Okay. So if you do use a curriculum, you can use this as a guideline to get rid of the fluff that's in your curriculum. Okay. If you don't use a curriculum, use this as your guideline to check off at the end of every year or so. How are we doing in these areas? Okay. So the first thing the little guys should be doing, like kindergarten, first, second grade, okay, they're working on writing and composing complete sentences. Okay. So they need to know that a sentence starts with a capital, ends with appropriate ed mark. It has a noun in it, it has a verb in it, and it makes sense. Okay. That's really all they need to be working on, is writing and composing complete sentences that make sense. Okay. And also they're working on their spacing. So when you're looking at handwriting, not the composition, but the handwriting part, is spacing between letters, spacing between words, spaces between sentences, lining up the letters on the page with the lines and things like that. That's all you really need to be working on, and the kid needs to master by the time they get to third or fourth grade. Okay, let's go with fourth grade. Once they're able to write and compose complete sentences, back up just real quick to this here. Even if your child is not ready to compose their own sentence, like they're having trouble putting their thoughts into a sentence that makes sense, copy work is great. So give them good sentences to copy. And then as they're doing that, they are not only learning the rules of punctuation and grammar and what a sentence looks like and sounds like, but they're also practicing their spelling as well. Okay. All right. So once they get to like fourth grade, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, seventh, depending on their level. Okay. Now you're working on paragraphs. So now that they can write a complete sentence, right? Now you're teaching them or giving them opportunities to string those sentences together into a clear and concise paragraph. So they're working on paragraphing, okay? Writing a paragraph, knowing that a paragraph is 7, 8, 9 sentences about one particular topic. You don't want them to go off on a tangent. That a paragraph usually starts with a topic sentence. It will have 5 to 7 supporting sentences about that topic. And then it ends with some sort of final clincher or summary sentence to summarize the whole paragraph. Okay. So that's what you're working on in the middle school years, is stringing those sentences, those well-constructed sentences, into paragraphs that are clear and concise about one topic. Okay. And then the handwriting part or the typing part comes in with the formatting. Make sure they have a title, and the title is centered. The title has something to do with the paragraph. It's indented, it's double spaced, it's using certain font, or lining it up with the margins if they're handwriting it. Okay, so those are the things that they're working on in middle school. And then once they're able to write a clear and concise paragraph without going off on tangents, then you can start working on essays. And this is usually in high school. Okay. Now essays, once they get to high school, you've got that 5-point essay, right? Where you've got an intro paragraph that introduces the reader to what the assignment or the essay is going to be about. And then they spend 3 different paragraphs addressing 3 different points about that topic. And then there's a concluding paragraph that summarizes the whole thing. Okay, if you want to get into that, go for it. If they're going off to college, they're probably going to need that or have experience with that. Okay. But if they're going right into the business world, really, when was the last time you were asked to write a 5-point essay? You weren't. You were asked to communicate your ideas, your thoughts, the business, the product, whatever it was, in clear and concise ways in different paragraphs. Okay. So anyway, the next thing that they're going to learn is how to write an essay. Now, at this point, you probably want to introduce your kids to the 3 major types of essays. My acronym for this is PEN with an extra P, mainly because when they're in high school, you want to make sure that they do some sort of poetry. That's the first P, whether they write poetry, analyze poetry, read poetry, whatever. Okay. The second P is persuasive. So you want to give your high schoolers an opportunity to write essays that are argumentative, where they're trying to persuade an audience or their reader in some opinion. Okay. So this could be speeches, whatever, letters to editors, whatever you want. Okay. The E stands for expository essays. So these are your informative essays. So these are the ones we know of as research reports. These are your compare and contrast. These are your process paragraphs like how-tos. Okay. These are if you're doing literature, they might be character analysis or book analysis, book summaries, whatever. Okay. And then the N stands for narrative, which is basically your creative writing. It's where they are writing essays that tell stories. And these stories could be fictional, like a book, or they could be factual, which are personal narratives. So like if they are going off to college, these are probably going to be their personal statement essays, or these are like memoirs and stuff like that. Okay. So these are the 3 stages. When they're younger, you want to make sure that they can write sentences that make sense, right? Then they string these sentences together into clear and concise paragraphs about one topic. And then once they master paragraphs, then they put these paragraphs together to then start writing essays. That's it. That's your writing standards in a nutshell. Okay. So with that in mind, you've got 12 years if you're homeschooling from, first grade to 12th grade to help your students learn and master and have experiences with these types of writing. Okay. So let's ask that question. Today, did we write something? If you're able to say, yes, today we wrote something, it was a good day. And we're going to talk about all the different ways that you can answer this question. Okay. But before we do, I want to distinguish between the 2 different things. When we say writing in the language arts area or the language arts subject, we're talking about 2 different things. We're talking about the handwriting, which is the physical writing of words onto a paper. Okay. And then you've got the composition part, which is the content. That's where you're taking thoughts in your head and organizing them in such a way that you're writing them down in words. Okay. So those are 2 different things. If your kids did any kind of handwriting today, it was a great day. So if they wrote a to-do list, they checked off the grocery list. If they wrote a letter to a friend, all of that is handwriting, copy work. Okay. And then composition is them coming up with some either original thoughts or doing something creative, which we're going to talk about now. Okay. All right. So today, did we write something? Your goal is to have your kids write something, and I mean anything, every day. Okay. Doesn't have to be a paragraph. It doesn't have to be an essay. All right. So think about the stages, think about the ages they're in, think about your crazy day. Is it a busy, chaotic day where they don't have time for an awful lot of writing? Or is it a kind of a casual, low key kind of a day? All right. But your goal is to have your kids write something every day. So maybe it's thank you cards for Christmas or birthday presents. Maybe it's creating their own invitations to a party that's coming up. Maybe it's creating a grocery list. Maybe it is writing out their goals for the day. Maybe it is sending an email to a coach or to a college admissions advisor. It is literally anything that they are taking thoughts in their head and writing it out, either physically or typing or narrating it to you. That is writing. And on that note, Narration is a fabulous tool to teach your kids how to write, right? But narration is, for those of you who are familiar with it, it's after you read something, you ask your child to tell you what it was about or what they learned, right? Okay. Or what they took away from it. And so they're narrating back to you, but when they're narrating what they heard, what they learned, what they want to say, the story they made up, they are organizing their thoughts in their head in the way they want to say it, the words they want to use, the order in which they want to say it, and then it's coming out. That is the writing process. That is the first step in the writing process. So even if your child didn't physically write something today, but they told you a story or they narrated back to you something you read about history or science, you can say, check, they wrote something today, because you know that the first step in the writing process that happened in the narrating was actually a form of writing. Okay. Which is why narration is also very important when your kids do start to write sentences, paragraphs, and then essays, that they actually narrate to you or to themselves, maybe out loud, their thoughts before they actually begin to write, because it's a great way to do a brain dump. It's a great way to organize their thoughts. And so they narrate it first one way, and then each time they narrate it to you or to someone else, by the time they sit down to actually write it, they have really solidified what they want to say, how they want to say it, the order in which they want to say it. So narration is a powerful writing tool, but it's also part of the writing process. Okay. So you want your kids to write something, anything, every day. All right. So let's talk about different ways that your kids can do this. Family writing was my favorite. So this was part of our morning time ritual. So in our morning time basket, we each had our own writing journal, and I had this little booklet that had writing prompts in it. And so after we did our read aloud, I would read one of these writing prompts to everybody, including myself. And then I would give everybody, including myself, 5 minutes to respond to that writing prompt in our journal, okay, in our writing journal. So it could be as simple as describe the weather outside today, or it could be uh, invent a new sandwich, or tell me how to make your favorite pizza. Okay. It could be something silly like the day it rained, it literally rained cats and dogs. Okay. So these writing prompts, sometimes they were straight up factual types of things, like tell me about your best friend, or what was something that you dream of doing when you grow up. I mean, those kinds of questions, right? But they could also be very informative, right? So it could be tell me about something you learned yesterday, or summarize a book that you're reading right now. Okay. Or they could be straight up creative writing, silly kinds of things as well, where you give them titles to stories and then they have to write a story that goes with the title, or you give them the first line of a story and then they have to continue the story, right? So I had a little book that had a bunch of those, but you can find them online for free. They've also got some really great ones on Amazon that I recommend. One of them is 652 writing prompts for kids. That one's a really good one. You could do like a gratitude journal instead of journal prompts, where every day the kids and you are writing down something that they're thankful for. But anyway, I would give them a prompt, and then we would spend 5 minutes responding to that prompt, and then we each shared what we wrote. It took maybe 15, 20 minutes to do this, but this was our way, my way of making sure the kids wrote something every day. And it was a great connecting point for us. But then the other thing that it was helpful for was that, especially when they were younger, when I would share my stories or my answers, my responses, I noticed that the next day or a couple of days later, maybe some of the words I used showed up in my kids' writing response, or maybe a storyline that I went off on, or a particular character that I may have created shows up in their writing, right? So it was a fun way for me to informally teach them different things without telling them, well, this time I want you to use these vocabulary words, right? So it was just kind of fun. Now, a lot of people ask me, did I grade their journals? Did I go through and, mark them up and look for editing errors and spelling errors and stuff like that? I did not touch their journals with a red pen, a purple pen, a green pen. No. Okay. I did read them though, and I used them for evaluation purposes where I would look and see, oh my gosh, my son is still misspelling this word. He uses it all the time. He's really got to learn how to spell this word correctly. Okay. Or I'm noticing that my daughter, her sentences don't have periods. And so they all look like one long sentence, right? And so what I would do is that when I did sit down with my kids one-on-one to maybe do a writing lesson or to do something else or whatever, I would just mention, hey, it's real important that we use periods here. And since you were asking a question, maybe we should use a question mark because then that lets your reader know whatever. Okay. So I would just kind of teach them informally those different things. And I would use the misspelled words that they misspelled often as like their personal spelling list, because I figured if those were the words they were using all the time, those are the words they should probably be spelling correctly. Okay. But I never wrote and marked up their journal because then they realize this isn't for fun. Mom's using this and she's going to correct me. And so the creative writing stops because now they're thinking about what should I write? How should I write it in such a way that mom's not going to, mark it up or get upset, or they're not using words they want to use because they know they don't know how to spell them. So they're going to choose simpler words that they know how to spell. Right. So don't do any of the evaluation stuff with their journals. Just write for fun and as a way to connect with your kids. Okay. Another great way that you could do writing every day in some form is some kind of creative writing. So yes, we get in this school mentality that kids have to be writing paragraphs about sharks and about, the American Revolution and George Washington and all this kind of stuff. But their paragraphs and their sentences and their essays don't always have to be informative, historical, and scientific. Okay. So a lot of kids who say they don't like writing, what they're saying is they don't want to write about things they don't care about. But they do like to write and they do like to come up with stories and they're good storytellers, right? And so make sure you give your kids opportunities during the day or during the week to write about anything they want to write about, to create their own stories, to make up their own imaginary lands, right? Okay. To imitate their favorite authors when they write. So give them lots of opportunities for creative writing. And that's where those journal prompts come in handy, or to give them books that have journal prompts in them, right? And then so I often found that when we did our family writing, if there was a particular story that my daughter or son really enjoyed, but they didn't have time to finish it, they often went off and finished it later on when they did have more time. Okay, so just make sure they have time to do some creative writing, not just your usual informative. Okay. Also, there's lots of fun opportunities throughout the day and the week to introduce your kids to different literary devices and poetry in fun ways without just, making it dreary and boring. Okay. So like, for instance, personification, that's a literary device. That is where, an inanimate object takes on human qualities, right? And so oftentimes in our family writing, I would give my kids a writing prompt that would, I would put several kitchen utensils and school supplies on the table. And I would say, pick one of those objects and then tell me their point of view today. Okay. What is it like in the day in the life of this, this whip or this scissors or whatever. Okay. Or tape. And then they would write as if the inanimate object, the kitchen object or the school supply was a human and had feelings and what it was doing during the day. Okay. So it's just a fun way to introduce like personification. At Thanksgiving, sometimes I had them write about Thanksgiving from the turkey's point of view. Okay. Stuff like that. Another one, I love doing onomatopoeia. So sometimes we would just have an onomatopoeia hunt day where all day long we were listening for and coming up with words that are spelled the way that they sound, right? Or we would list out 20 onomatopoeia words like whoosh and and hoot and things like that, right? And then I would tell them, turn it into a story or use one of those as your title, or make a poem that uses all of these words in it. Okay. So you could just do a lot of fun, different writing activities during your family writing time, or during, like, creative writing opportunity you're giving your kids, where you're introducing different literary devices. Okay. And then poetry. My kids didn't really like poetry, but I really wanted to. I kept trying, and I think I was just making it too dry and boring. And so I did a whole podcast on how our poetry tea time came to be. It was very serendipitous, and then it became one of my kids' favorite things to do. So if you haven't listened to that episode, it's called Poetry Tea Time. You could go listen to that. I give great, lots of ideas and things on how to introduce poetry to your kids and having poetry tea time. Actually, at my website, I've got this grab and go ebook about different tea parties, poetry tea parties you could have throughout the year. So lots of fun stuff there, just to make writing fun and different. Okay. Now, another thing you could do with your kids is use wordless picture books as ways to get their creative juices flowing. So, like, for instance, there's this, my son loves dogs, and so there's this wordless picture book about a dog named Carl. And there's no words in it. That's why it's called a wordless picture book. The story is told through the illustrations. All right. And so we would read this book together, and he would tell his story. He would describe what was happening in each of the illustrations and what Carl was doing in his own words. And then the next day I would read it, but the story would be completely different because I was the one telling the story. Okay. So the thing about using wordless picture books is that the story can change every single time, or it could be the same story, but it just gets better and better and better. And again, when they're narrating, that is actually the first step in the process of writing. So they're actually writing if they're not actually writing. Okay. And then if the kid really likes the story he came up with, then he could dictate it to you and you write it out for them for each page, or he eventually writes out a sentence or two for each of the pages. But there are so many beautifully illustrated and super fun wordless picture books out there. Just go to your local library, ask your librarian for all the wordless picture books she has, and then check them all out and try that and see if that also gets your kids' creative juices flowing. Okay. Also, another way that you could answer the question, today, did we write something? Obviously, there's going to be probably some sort of academic writing somewhere in your day or somewhere in your week. Okay. We did notebooking, which is like journal writing, but we did it in all of our different subjects. Okay. So we had a nature journal for our science studies. And so every week we went out on a hike or we explored something outdoors. The kids picked something that struck their fancy, and then they either sat down right there and drew it, or they came home and drew it. And then for the writing part, we would learn about whatever it was that they drew. And then in their nature journal, they would write a caption for it. They would tell it, they would say what it was, the day they found it, where they found it. If they were older, they would write the classification of it or its scientific name. If they were even a little bit older, they would write maybe a paragraph about it and include that in their journal. Sometimes they labeled it. That's your writing. Sometimes I just gave them copy work, like one sentence or two sentences about the object that they drew, or I found a poem that had to do with it, or a Bible verse that had to do with it, or an inspirational quote that had to do with it, and they copied it and wrote it in their nature journal. So again, there was some original composition. Sometimes there was just handwriting practice. It was also our science notebooks, our nature journal. So whenever we did science experiments, the kids would write out their hypothesis, and then they would write out the procedure, and then they would write out what happened, and we took pictures. And so, all of that are opportunities for writing that are meaningful for the kids. We also had a history notebook. Basically, we created our own history curriculum because we never used a history curriculum or a science curriculum. And so whatever we learned that week in history, we would take a day to draw either that person we learned about or the event that we learned about in our history notebook. And then underneath it, they would caption it with the name of the person or the name of the event, the date that it happened. And then on the second page next to it, like a double page spread, they would either copy sentences that I gave them about it, or they would compose their own summary sentences about it, or they would write a paragraph about it. Okay. And so that was our history notebook. So by the end of the year, we had a whole history textbook or a whole history encyclopedia about medieval history or about the Renaissance that the kids actually wrote and illustrated themselves. Okay, so that was another way we notebooked. We did an art notebook, so art studies. So one page would have a picture, a masterpiece, right? A painting that I wanted the kids to learn about. And underneath it would be the name of the artist and when it was done and the era that it was in. And then on the second page, a double page spread, I either had 4 sentences for them to copy about the artist or the painting, or they wrote a summary sentence about it, or they described it in their own words. And then there was a section on the page for them to draw their version of that masterpiece. Or like, for instance, if we were learning about the Mona Lisa, right, then I might have them draw their own self-portrait, right, or draw a picture of their favorite person, right? Or I would ask them, hey, you draw a version of the Mona Lisa. So that was our art studies. We did the same thing for music studies with composers. We even had like a fun math pun book that we collected. My husband loves to tell stupid dad jokes. And so we collected math puns. And so just every opportunity we had to notebook in different academic subjects, we did. And I just knew that that day or that week, the kids did some really good, they had great opportunities for writing. Okay. All right. Some other things that you could do that even if your kids aren't actually writing something, if you're playing some sort of spelling game, vocabulary game, composition game, reading game, all of that is considered, today, did we write? Yes. Yes, we did, because we played Boggle, we played Scrabble, we played Bananagrams, we played 20 questions. Because remember, language arts is just not writing and reading. It's speaking, right? It's vocabulary, it's spelling, it's grammar. All right. Yes, we played a fun game of parts of speech bingo, right? So any kind of, we played Hangman, we played I Spy, any of those kinds of games where the kids are working with words, or they've got a lot of really fun games nowadays that help your kids create stories. So you've got the Rory Cube story cubes where they roll these dice and each dice has different pictures on it. And then the kids have to write a story that utilize all of the pictures on the dice that they rolled. There's another one called Tall Tales. It's a game. It's a board game, and it comes with these little figures that you randomly pull, and then whatever you pull out of the bag, those things have to be in your story. There's also story time cards, which basically have different pictures of characters and settings, and your story has to start with this word or whatever, and you randomly deal these out, and everyone creates their own story, but these elements have to be in your story. So anytime you play a game that has to do with words or with composing and telling stories, that's writing, even though they might not actually be writing something that day. Okay. All right. Now, language arts curriculum. Let me just tell you, and this may not be you. We didn't have a formal writing curriculum until I think maybe the kids were in 6th or 7th grade. So my kids learned all their parts of speech from playing Mad Libs in our morning time and listening and learning all of the Schoolhouse Rock videos, conjunction, junction, what's your function, lolly, 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 get your adverb here. They learned their parts of speech that way, and all of those other really fun jingles that you can find for free on YouTube. We didn't use any formal curriculum. When you do decide to use if you decide to use a curriculum, because literally you could teach your kids those 3 things I told you, right? How to write a sentence, then how to write a paragraph, then how to string paragraphs together into an essay. You don't need a formal curriculum for that. However, some of my favorites were very Charlotte Mason-y. And so I've said this numerous times, but I absolutely love Primary Language Lessons and Intermediate Language Lessons by Emma Surreal. You can do that during family time with all of your kids all at the same time. And each of the quote unquote exercises take 5 to 10 minutes. Done. Check. Okay. Super easy, super gentle, and it's language arts. So it's just not the proper way to use is and are, or how to properly use there, and there. They'll also have poetry, they'll have observation, they'll have creative writing, they'll have spelling, they'll have vocabulary. It's all in there. Okay, it's super fun. It's called Primary Language Lessons, and then the second book is Intermediate Language Lessons. Those two books literally served our family from first grade all the way through like eighth grade. Okay. If you're going to use a formal language arts curriculum for the younger kids, I do like The Good and the Beautiful. Again, it's very Charlotte Masony, and it does bring in all of the language arts. That's what I love about it. Okay. But what you need to remember when you're doing a language arts curriculum is you really don't need um, let's just say the third grade language arts curriculum from Abeka. Okay. Because what's going to come is you're going to get a third grade reading comprehension workbook. You're going to get third grade readers for your kids to read. You're going to get a third grade spelling workbook, a third grade vocabulary workbook, a third grade grammar workbook, and you might even get a third grade writing workbook. You're going to get all these different workbooks that totally separate the language arts into different components, right? When really you want your kids to learn the art of language, and you don't have to parse it out that way. Okay. It's very expensive, and it could get very time consuming if your kid is literally doing work in his spelling workbook, and then he moves on to his grammar workbook, and then he goes to his handwriting workbook, and then he's going to be doing language arts workbooks all day long. Okay. So my suggestion, no matter if you use curriculum or not, is that at the beginning of each year, come up with a language arts goal for each of your kids, okay? And focus on one area of language arts that year. All right, one area. So if you've got like your second grader and he's still not very confident with his reading, maybe your goal that year is to help him become a more confident, independent reader. Okay, so you're going to be focusing mostly on teaching him how to read that year. Maybe your fifth grader is a horrible speller. So you're going to spend the entire year really focusing on helping her with her spelling, right? Maybe your eighth grader still doesn't know how to write a paragraph that doesn't go off into rabbit hole tangents, right? So the goal for that child this year is you're going to really hone in on learning how to write a paragraph. Now, does that mean you're not going to be working on vocabulary and spelling and punctuation, and you're not going to have them read or write anything? No. They're going to be doing all that stuff. But your main focus is writing a paragraph, or becoming a better speller, or learning to read. So what I mean by that is, let's say the day is getting really hectic and you know you don't have time for a lot more stuff to do. The one thing you're going to do today is some stuff with spelling. You're going to play a spelling game, or you are going to talk a little bit about the paragraph he's been working on. Okay. So it's your main focus. It's what you spend time on. And it's what you go to when you don't have time for anything else. Okay. And the main reason for that is, remember in the beginning when I talked about the writing standards, they are so repetitive. They just do the same things over and over and over again. So if this year your main focus with your fifth grader is on spelling, just know that next year you work on a different area of language arts that she needs to improve in. And then her seventh grade year, then you really focus in on a different area of language arts. Okay. You have so much time to help your students become good communicators, both in writing and in speech. Okay. Real quick, I did want to talk a little bit about technology, AI, and app assistance when it comes to writing. So should your kids learn to print first or cursive? That's up to you. Science says it's easier to do cursive because kids are already scribbling. That's the first thing they do. And so it's easier to write in cursive first than print, but that's up to you. And also when they do cursive, it uses both sides of the brain. Whereas when they're printing, they're only using the language side of the brain. But that's up to you. If your kid's already writing his name or the letters of his name in print, then just keep going with the print. Okay. Should you teach your kids how to type? I say yes. I would teach them. I taught my kids how to type when they were in fifth or sixth grade, when their paragraphs started getting longer. It was also because of hand fatigue, things like that. Also, it's a skill, a word processing skill that was important. And I also found that when my kids type things out, instead of hand wrote it, their stories were longer, more elaborate. The vocabulary words they used were better. There's just something about the typing as opposed to the handwriting sometimes for some kids. Okay. Also, if they are not good spellers or they're dyslexic or have dysgraphia, teaching them how to type and using a typing program also helps them with their grammar skills because they have to type complete sentences with capitals and periods and end marks. It helps them with their spelling and their sight words because a lot of the words that they're continuously and repetitively typing are those sight words. So it actually helps them in a roundabout way with those kinds of things. So I say go for it. Speech to text is also a great tool to use. If your kids are dictating to you when they're younger, look at speech to text as the same thing when they're older. Often I got way better and longer and more elaborate essays from my son when he was able to use the speech to text because he wasn't boggled down with, how do I spell this word? And is there a better way to say it this way? He would just walk around the room. My daughter would do the same thing. And spew out their thoughts and the computer would type it for them. Is it cheating? No, it is not, because then after that, we would print what they spoke into the computer. And then it became an editing practice or editing exercise. And they would go through and they would make sure that all of the sentences started with a capital letter. All the words were used the correct way, like there, and there. Periods were in the right place, or they were put in because sometimes they speak so fast that the computer didn't put the periods in. So it became a really great editing exercise as well. Okay, so speech to text is also great, especially if your kid has dysgraphia or dyslexia. We didn't have AI when my kids were still in school. It's a big thing now. AI can be very helpful with like writing prompts, helping you as the mom come up with ideas of writing activities and games and stuff like that. It could be helpful for research, but I still would have your kids use more reliable forms of research than just asking ChatGPT something. And then app assistants like Grammarly, awesome. Not only does Grammarly help them suggest mistakes in their writing and their punctuation and things like that. But if you pay for the subscription, it also becomes like a writing tutor and it will offer suggestions on this is how you worded it. However, if you want it to be more parallel, maybe you could write it this way instead, or this wasn't clear and concise. You might want to word it this way so it makes more sense. And so it actually becomes like a writing tutor. Okay. So use it as often. These different technology helps as often as you feel comfortable, but they can be used as teaching and learning experiences too. Okay. And then also when it comes to writing, if your child has dyslexia, and they complain a lot about their writing, or they just can't get the words that they have in their head onto their page, they might have some form of dysgraphia. I did a whole podcast episode on this called Teaching Differently. And I also have a whole bunch of reels at my Instagram account, all on dyslexia and dysgraphia. So make sure you check those out. I've got some ideas there too. Okay. And here's a shameless plug before we run out of time. I went a little over today. I do have a new book coming out in 2026 where I am walking you through how to keep your days simple and your expectations realistic. And I'm walking you through how to ask these 9 different questions. Today, did we? So today did we write? So in my book, I've got a whole chapter dedicated just to this topic where I talk about these things and a whole bunch more. Okay. So if you would like more information about the book or you would like to be on the book launch team, make sure you subscribe to coffeewithcarrie.org. And that way you'll get emails and newsletters and information about all of that. So if you want to pre-order it or you want to get it when it comes out, I would love you for that. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. So it was super fun talking with you today. Just remember, if you can ask the question, today, did we write something? And you're able to say, yes, yes, we did. Then it was a really good day.